The quiet hum of the golf course was abruptly shattered. A sleek black private jet, its polished surface reflecting the sunlight, descended with chilling precision, cutting through the air. Before we continue the story, comment what city you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you enjoy stories like this. The wheels touched down on the pristine green of Hillsborough Golf Club, shocking those who had gathered for a day of leisure. Eyes turned upward, disbelief etched on their faces. The hum of the jet's engines faded, but the tension in the air only thickened. A few seconds passed before it happened. Phones began to rise, the click of cameras snapping in unison. People scrambled to get a glimpse of the unannounced visitor who had just arrived. But then, their gaze shifted to a woman standing at the edge of the golf course, her hands clasped together in a quiet prayer. Eva Daniels, a simple, elegant figure who had been the subject of ridicule all day, mocked, belittled, dismissed, stood tall. In that moment, she wasn't just the woman they had mocked in the club. She wasn't just the target of their nasty whispers. She wasn't simply a newcomer in their exclusive world. She was something more. And as the jet's engines powered down, everyone at Hillsborough Golf Club realized something they had never known. They had no idea who she really was. With the sun setting behind her, casting a golden glow over her figure, Eva turned and faced the crowd, a soft smile playing on her lips. The same woman they had snubbed for hours was no longer the invisible outcast. She was the calm in the storm, the one who held everything in her hands. The sound of the jet's door opening echoed through the silent crowd, and every eye turned to see who would step out. But what they didn't expect, their jaws tightened in shock, was the man who emerged. His presence didn't need words. It didn't need anything but the weight of his silence, the intensity in his eyes. He was a figure of power, of control, and it was clear that he was not just any man. He was Jonathan Daniels, Eva's husband. And in that instant, the world of Hillsborough Golf Club, the club that had laughed at, belittled, and scorned Eva, was about to be flipped upside down. Eva stood tall, calm, not a single ounce of fear in her. The crowd, uncertain of their next move, began to whisper among themselves, suddenly aware that everything was about to change. By the time Jonathan's voice broke through the silence, every person who had ever underestimated Eva would be begging for forgiveness. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to discover they were far more than they appeared? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story will leave you speechless. Subscribe now, and don't miss a single twist in this unforgettable tale. Eva Daniels wasn't the kind of woman who sought attention. She didn't need to be in the spotlight. She wasn't interested in the glitz and glamour of high society. Eva's beauty was quiet and understated, like the calm before a storm, unassuming, but undeniable. She had always believed that true strength came from within, that it came from faith, love, and resilience. When Eva and her husband, Jonathan Daniels, moved to Hillsborough, Georgia, it wasn't for the glittering promises of wealth or status. It was because Jonathan's business was expanding into the South. They needed to build roots here, roots that could grow deep and strong. But despite Jonathan's success, Eva knew that their new life in Hillsborough would be more than just a business opportunity. It was a test of character, of strength, and of belief. Hillsborough wasn't just any town. It was the kind of place where wealth and status weren't just markers of success. They were the very currency of social life. To fit in here, you had to prove you belonged, through connections, appearances, and influence. But Eva wasn't the kind of woman to fight for approval or compromise who she was. She didn't care about the glimmering allure of wealth, nor did she care about the opinions of people who wore their status as a badge of honor. Still, Eva understood the importance of fitting in. She wanted to be part of the community, to find a place where she could build lasting relationships, and she needed something to occupy her time while Jonathan immersed himself in his work. So, she joined Hillsborough Country Greens, a prestigious golf club where the town's elite gathered to play and socialize. At first, it seemed like a good idea. The air was different here, soothing, expansive, a place where one could escape the noise of the outside world. But as Eva made her way into the club's grand halls, it didn't take long for her to realize something she hadn't expected. The walls, metaphorical and literal, were far higher than she had anticipated. She was met with cold stares, insincere smiles, and polite indifference. The women of Hillsborough Country Greens, dressed in their designer attire, with their perfectly manicured nails and expensive fragrances, looked at her as though she didn't belong. She wasn't part of their world. She wasn't dressed in the right labels, nor did she carry herself with the same sharp, calculated confidence. She was an outsider, a newcomer in their circle, and they made sure she knew it. But Eva, with her heart rooted firmly in faith, wasn't deterred. If there was one thing she had learned in life, it was that approval from the world didn't matter. Only the approval of God mattered. If God be for me, who can be against me? This mantra, this unwavering belief in the power of God, was the foundation on which she stood. So she endured their coldness with grace. Every glance that spoke volumes, every whispered remark behind her back, she took in stride. She smiled. She made small talk. She didn't seek their approval, but she also didn't shy away from their gaze. If she could teach them anything, it would be that kindness wasn't about status. It was about who you were, regardless of where you came from. But while Eva's heart remained steadfast, the rejection was palpable. Each passing day in the golf club chipped away at her. It wasn't just about her appearance or the dismissive attitudes. It was about something much deeper. The truth was, some of these people didn't think she belonged because of who she was. They saw her as a woman who wasn't from their world, a woman of color. And in the back of their minds, they believed that people like her didn't belong in spaces like this. The weight of the racial prejudice simmered beneath the surface. Eva could feel it, the subtle glances, the snickers, the whispers when she wasn't looking. She didn't have to hear the words to know what they meant. They had made it clear to her, with every encounter, that she wasn't one of them. She wasn't welcome. But here was the thing they didn't know. Eva didn't need their approval. She didn't need to be a part of their world. She had something far greater, far more enduring. She had faith in God's purpose for her. She had the quiet strength that came from knowing who she was, no matter how others saw her. What they also didn't know was that the man by her side, Jonathan Daniels, was not just any ordinary man. To them, he was just the handsome, well-dressed husband of an outsider. They couldn't possibly imagine the level of power, the depth of influence Jonathan wielded. What they didn't know was that Jonathan's empire was more than just business. It was about vision, integrity, and a purpose that went beyond wealth. And as Eva silently endured the rejection, she carried with her a secret. Jonathan Daniels wasn't just a successful entrepreneur. He was a man whose power was built not just on money, but on an ironclad understanding of loyalty, respect, and faith. And what they had underestimated was the depth of his connection to his wife. He didn't just protect her, he revered her. But that power, hidden, unseen, was about to be revealed in a way that no one could have predicted. And when it did, it would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. Do you think class and status still affect how people treat each other? Comment your thoughts below. Hit like if you've ever been the underdog in a situation, fighting for your place in a world that doesn't see you. Eva Daniels' days were simple, steady, and anchored in the quiet strength of her faith. She woke each morning before the sun, as was her custom, and knelt beside her bed in prayer. With every whispered word, she sought guidance, peace, and the strength to face the challenges that lay ahead. Her faith was her foundation, and in the quiet moments of prayer, she reminded herself that no matter what the world threw her way, God was always with her. After prayer, she would head into the kitchen, where the scent of freshly baked bread or warm muffins would fill the house. There was something comforting about the process of baking, measuring the flour, stirring the batter, and waiting for the oven to work its magic. It was a small act of love, something she could offer the world with nothing expected in return. She often thought that perhaps her baking might be her way of reaching people, of sharing a bit of warmth in a world that could sometimes feel cold. But even in the warmth of her home, there was a certain loneliness that clung to her. Moving to a new town, leaving behind the people she had known, the friends she had trusted, everything had changed. Hillsboro, Georgia, was meant to be a fresh start, a place where Jonathan's business could thrive. But for Eva, it felt like an empty canvas, one that had yet to be filled with the relationships she longed for. She was kind, approachable, eager to make connections, but the people she encountered seemed to close themselves off, as though they already had their circles, their alliances. And to them, she didn't belong. Eva wasn't the kind of woman to wallow in her solitude, though. She poured her energy into other things, things that grounded her, things that brought her peace. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, she volunteered at the local church. It wasn't grand work. She didn't seek praise or recognition. She simply gave what she had to offer, her time, her listening ear, her love. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, held the door open for newcomers, and helped organize events. It wasn't much in the eyes of the world, but in her heart, it was everything. She believed that every act of kindness, no matter how small, rippled out into the world. Yet, the loneliness never quite went away. When she walked into Hillsborough Country Greens for the first time, she had hoped to find something more, a sense of belonging. But what greeted her was far from welcoming. The other women at the club didn't acknowledge her presence. Their eyes would flicker over her, but they never quite settled on her face. Conversations would pause when she entered the room, only to start back up again in hushed tones once she passed by. She felt it in the air, the judgment, the dismissiveness. She smiled anyway. Her mother had taught her that a smile could break through walls that words could never touch. She smiled, even when they ignored her. Eva wasn't naive. She knew that they didn't want her there. She knew that some people just couldn't see past the color of her skin, the way she dressed, or the quiet strength she carried with her. But none of that mattered to her. She had no intention of fitting into their world. She had only come to find a place of peace, a community where she could build something real. And so, she showed up every week, patient, kind, always with a smile, no matter how cold the reception. She didn't want to force herself into their world, but she refused to be discouraged by their cold shoulders. After each visit to the club, she'd return home, take a deep breath, and bake. There was something therapeutic about the rhythm of her hands in the dough, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. It was her way of resetting, of refocusing on what really mattered, her faith and her family. Eva's faith, though, was something deeper than simple belief. It was a driving force, a lens through which she saw the world. Every moment she spent in silence, every moment of reflection, she reminded herself of the words from Scripture that had guided her life for years. Love your neighbor as yourself, and bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. She lived by these words, even when it seemed impossible. And when it came to the club, she wasn't without small acts of generosity. They weren't grand gestures, but they were genuine, heartfelt actions that came from a place of love. After every round of golf, Eva would take the time to leave an extra tip for the staff. It wasn't about showing off or trying to impress anyone. It was simply about doing what was right. On several occasions, she stayed behind to help clean up after the events, never drawing attention to herself, never looking for a reward. When she saw a woman sitting alone at a table, overlooked and ignored, Eva would approach her, offer a smile, and take a seat. Sometimes, it was the smallest act of kindness that could break through the walls people built around themselves. Despite the cool reception, Eva carried on, unbothered. Her smile never faltered, her faith never wavered. There was something deep inside her that told her she was exactly where she needed to be. And even though she longed for the day when the others would see her for who she truly was, someone worthy of respect, someone worthy of friendship, she didn't let the silence of their rejection shake her. God had a plan for her, she knew it. And in her heart, she trusted that one day, everything would fall into place. Have you ever tried to fit in and been rejected? Share below what that experience was like. If you believe kindness always wins, drop a yes in the comments. Eva had always believed in the power of kindness. She believed that, no matter how cold the world could be, if she kept showing up with a heart full of love, things would eventually shift. It had been a few months since she'd first walked through the gates of Hillsborough Country Greens, and though things hadn't been easy, she was still hopeful. She had been patient. But this time was different. The local charity golf tournament was an event that everyone at the club seemed to be talking about. It was meant to be a day of goodwill, of giving back to the community. Eva, eager to show her support for the cause, decided to sign up. She wasn't the most skilled golfer, but she figured her participation alone would be a step toward fitting in, toward becoming part of something bigger. When she signed up, she felt a mix of excitement and nerves. But the moment she walked into the clubhouse that morning, she could sense something in the air. The cold stares, the whispers, the judgment. It didn't take long for her to realize that she was still an outsider, and it wouldn't take much for her to be reminded of that. Chelsea Montgomery, one of the most influential women at the club, was the first to notice Eva's arrival. With her perfectly pressed white golf attire and her perfectly sculpted smile, Chelsea sauntered over to Eva with a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Oh, you're really going to play?" Chelsea asked with a thinly veiled laugh. Her voice dripped with condescension. "This isn't mini-golf, sweetheart." A group of women who had gathered nearby snickered, their eyes dancing with amusement at the expense of Eva's discomfort. Eva, however, held her ground. She didn't flinch. She didn't allow the harshness in Chelsea's voice to steal her peace. She simply smiled softly and nodded, her eyes lowering to avoid any further confrontation. But the cruelty didn't stop there. As the tournament began, Eva arrived at her assigned station, only to find that her golf clubs were missing. She searched for them, asking the staff, but they could only offer confused looks. After some time, she found them, hidden away in a storage closet. The thought that someone had deliberately moved them twisted her heart, but she didn't let it show. Still, there was more to come. During the tournament, as she lined up for a shot, Eva felt the coolness of a drink splashing against the back of her legs. Someone had knocked over her drink, on purpose. Her face flushed, but she didn't let the embarrassment control her. Instead, she took a deep breath and wiped it off as best she could. But just before she turned to continue, she overheard a conversation behind her. "She probably can't even afford to be here." The words hit her like a slap in the face. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her or questioned her worth, but it stung in a way that left her breathless. She knew what they thought. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't part of their world. She wasn't worthy of being in their presence, let alone participating in something they considered their exclusive domain. For a moment, Eva felt the weight of their cruelty sink into her chest. It would have been so easy to walk away in that instant, to let the shame wash over her, and to retreat into the solitude she had known so well. But as she stood there, her heart heavy, something deep within her rose up. She knew she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for something bigger. She was fighting for dignity. She was fighting for justice. And more than that, she was fighting with faith that the battle would be won, not by her might, but by the power of God. With a deep breath, Eva took a step back from the game. She turned, walking toward the club's exit, her club slung over her shoulder. As she walked, she whispered a prayer under her breath, words that had been her anchor for years, words that had carried her through moments of doubt and fear. "Jesus, fight my battle." Eva didn't need to argue. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't need to defend her place in this world. She knew that there was a power greater than the cruelty she had just encountered, greater than the whispers and the sneers. And in that moment, she handed the battle over to him, trusting that the victory wasn't in her hands. It was in God's. As she walked away, the sounds of the tournament continued, the laughter and chatter of the women who had excluded her still ringing in her ears. But Eva felt a calmness settle in her heart, a peace that didn't come from the approval of others, but from the deep, unshakable knowing that God was with her. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. What would you have done if you were Eva? Walked away or stood your ground? Share your thoughts below. Like this video if you believe God always sees what's done in secret. He's always fighting for us. The next day, Eva walked back onto the grounds of Hillsborough Country Greens, her steps measured but resolute. The air was thick with tension, and she could almost feel the eyes of the women on her, their gazes sharp like daggers. But today, she wasn't just walking in to play a game. She wasn't just there to be seen or to prove herself to them. She was there because she knew that her faith in Jesus Christ was stronger than any ridicule, stronger than any harsh word, stronger than any sneer. She had to keep going. She had to press on. As Eva took her usual place on the course, the cold reception from the previous day still fresh in her mind, she could feel the subtle mockery of the women around her. It wasn't just that they ignored her or pretended she wasn't there this time. They were more intentional, more direct. Chelsea, leading the charge as always, sauntered up to Eva, her smile one that couldn't hide the cruelty in her eyes. Without a word, she watched as one of her friends, Marie, ripped a page from the Bible Eva had brought with her that morning. She'd always kept it with her, a reminder of who she was and the strength that came from her faith. But today, it wasn't just the page being torn. It felt like a piece of Eva's soul was being shredded. "People like you don't belong here," Chelsea sneered, her words just loud enough for others to hear. The laughter that followed made Eva's heart ache, but she didn't flinch. She didn't react. Instead, she silently picked up her Bible, closed it, and tucked it into her bag. She didn't need to show them anything. She didn't need to defend her beliefs to anyone. Her peace came from knowing that God was her refuge, her fortress, and he would always protect her. Still, the hurt was there. And in the quiet moments, as she walked alone on the green hills, she thought back to a time when her faith had been tested in ways that seemed far more difficult than this. She thought back to her time in Louisiana. It was a small church on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where Eva had grown up. The pews were hard, the building was humble, but the faith was strong. Eva had been no stranger to the harsh realities of the world. She'd grown up in a time and place where people looked at her differently because of the color of her skin. She had known rejection long before she knew this golf club. But what she had learned in that small church was something no one could take away from her. Not hatred, not bitterness, not even the painful words of those who sought to tear her down. She had learned to hold her head high. She had learned to turn the other cheek, to forgive, to rise above the hate and the mockery. As she sat in that church as a young girl, listening to the pastor preach about grace and redemption, she had internalized a truth that stayed with her for the rest of her life. If God be for me, who can be against me? She clung to that belief, no matter how many times she was pushed down, no matter how many times she was told she didn't belong. Her faith was unshakable. And now, as she stood alone on the green at Hillsborough Country Greens, that faith was all she had. But still, the hurt of their words lingered. Eva's husband, Jonathan Daniels, was out of town. He had been traveling, managing his global business ventures, securing deals that would shape the future of their company. She hadn't told him about what had happened the day before, or what was happening now. Jonathan had enough on his plate. She didn't want to burden him with her struggles. She didn't want to seem weak. But what she didn't know was that someone from the club, was recording her every move. They had seen the confrontation with Chelsea and the others, and now they were sharing it with the world. The video spread like wildfire, and as it did, so did the cruelty. Then she recovered from her flashback. Later that day, Eva went home, not knowing the storm that was brewing behind the scenes. She slipped into her kitchen, her heart heavy, but her spirit still intact. She prayed, as she always did, asking God for strength and for the wisdom to handle whatever came next. But it was when she checked her phone that evening that her heart sank. The video had been shared all over social media. There it was, Chelsea pushing Eva, telling her she didn't belong. It was all captured, and now, the world was watching. Eva knew it wasn't just the club anymore. It was beyond that. The whispers and the lies were becoming louder. People who had never known her, never met her, were now making judgments. The video had gone viral, and with it, the mockery. Comment below, should Eva have told her husband right away? What would you have done? Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to see how this ends. Stay with us as the journey unfolds. Jonathan Daniels had always been a man of purpose and precision. His life built on making calculated moves and decisions that affected the world. He was used to the high-pressure environment of global business, traveling across the country and the world to secure deals that would set his company apart. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment he walked through the door of his home to find his wife, Eva, sitting at the kitchen table, her face hidden in her hands, tears silently falling as she pored over the scriptures in front of her. The scene was a stark contrast to the confident, radiant woman he had married. She had always been the pillar of strength, her faith unwavering. But tonight, something was off. He could sense it, deep in his gut. Something wasn't right. Eva. Jonathan's voice was soft, his footsteps careful as he approached her. She quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. I'm fine, Jonathan. Really. But Jonathan wasn't buying it. Eva never lied to him, not even when it came to something as small as a bad day at work. He reached for her hand, gently pulling her gaze toward him. What happened? He asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. She hesitated. Her heart was conflicted. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want him to feel like he had to fix things for her. She had always believed that God was her defender, that her battles were his to fight. But seeing her husband, her protector, so close, so concerned, made the weight of it all too much to carry in silence. She took a deep breath. It's nothing, really. Just the ladies at the club. Her words trailed off, and she could tell from the look in his eyes that he knew it wasn't nothing. Jonathan pressed on. Eva, you're not telling me everything. He didn't push her further, but she could see the wheels turning in his mind. Jonathan wasn't the type of man to let something slip by without addressing it head-on. That night, after a quiet dinner and an even quieter evening, Jonathan decided to take a look at his phone. He opened up the social media app, and that's when it hit him. The video was everywhere. A viral storm, tearing through the internet at breakneck speed. The video was titled, "Woman Gets Bullied at Golf Club for Being Too Different." Jonathan stared at the screen, the image of his wife, his strong, dignified, faith-filled Eva being humiliated by strangers. Chelsea, the one leading the mockery, was front and center in the video, with the camera zooming in on Eva's face as she tried to hold it together. And the words, they stung more than he could have imagined. "People like you don't belong here." Eva, his beautiful, humble wife, was being torn apart by the cruelty of others. Jonathan felt a surge of anger that shook him to his core. He knew his wife, he knew she would never seek revenge. But he also knew one thing: no one got to hurt his family and get away with it. Without another word, Jonathan stood up, his face set like stone. He moved swiftly to the desk in his office, his mind already racing. He picked up the phone, dialing his assistant. "Ready the jet." "We're going to Hillsborough," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension in the room. "Would you have wanted your partner to step in? Tell me why or why not. Subscribe if you think justice is coming for Chelsea." Stay tuned to see how it unfolds. The night was quiet, eerily so, yet Jonathan's thoughts were anything but calm. As the private jet sliced through the sky toward Hillsborough, memories from his past began to creep into his mind, each one as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. He thought back to the days when he had nothing, when he worked endless hours in a small, crumbling office, barely able to afford a cup of coffee. His dreams felt far out of reach, his ambition stifled by a world that told him a man like him, uneducated, poor, and without influence, could never rise to the top. But then, one fateful day, everything changed. It wasn't an investment or a business deal that saved him. It was Eva. She had stood by him when others had walked away, praying for his success when he couldn't find the strength to believe in himself. It was Eva's prayers that pulled him through the corporate crisis that almost broke him, the time when he lost everything, the time when he stood on the brink of losing it all. Her belief in him, in his potential, kept him going when he wanted to quit. Her unwavering faith had been the foundation upon which he built his empire. The memory of her voice, soft but strong, flooded his thoughts. "If God be for me, who can be against me?" Those words, repeated over and over in her gentle way, had been his anchor. And now, here she was facing yet another battle. Only this time, he wouldn't stand on the sidelines. This time, he was going to fight for her, with every ounce of power and influence at his disposal. As the jet continued its flight, Jonathan knew he was moments away from landing in a storm far different than the ones he'd weathered in his career. This was personal. This was about protecting what mattered most. Meanwhile, back in Hillsborough, Eva was sitting in a small, sterile office at the Hillsborough Country Greens Golf Club. The meeting was set up by the club's board members, a polite way of saying they wanted to get rid of her. As Eva entered, she could sense the tension in the room. There were no pleasantries, no warm welcomes, just cold, calculated stares. "Mrs. Daniels," one of the members began, his tone almost too sweet to be sincere, "we understand you've been facing some difficulties here. The atmosphere has changed, and it's caused some concerns." Eva nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd been prepared for this. She knew what they were really saying without needing to hear it aloud. "You don't belong here. You don't fit in." The woman beside him continued, "We just wanted to let you know that perhaps it would be best if you reconsidered your membership. It might be better for everyone involved." Eva held back the tears, her breath steady. She knew what they wanted her to do. They wanted her to leave, to walk away, humiliated, so that they could continue with their lives, untouched by the mess they had created. But Eva wasn't a woman who backed down. She had faced far worse than this in her life. She had been mocked in her youth, told she wasn't good enough, that she didn't fit in. But every time, she had overcome. And now, she wasn't going to let the prejudices of a few individuals dictate her future. She stood up slowly, her voice calm but firm. "I'll pray on it," she said, her words carrying more power than any of them could understand. "But I believe that if God has brought me here, I'm meant to stay." Back at the club, Chelsea Montgomery, the woman who had led the bullying campaign against Eva, was plotting her next move. She had a reputation to uphold, and she couldn't let Eva's presence at the club go unpunished. This weekend was the club's annual gala, a prestigious event that brought in high-profile members and guests from all over the region. Chelsea had a plan. She would humiliate Eva in front of everyone, make her so uncomfortable that she would have no choice but to leave. It would be the ultimate victory for Chelsea and her clique. But Eva wasn't the only one who had faith. As the gala drew closer, Eva retreated to her room, her heart heavy. She had prayed for peace, but the weight of everything was pressing on her. She stood by the window, gazing out at the darkening sky, and whispered, "Lord, I'm weary, but I trust you." She didn't know what the night would bring. She didn't know how much more she could endure. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone. Eva's faith had never wavered before, and it wouldn't now. She had made it through worse battles in her life, and she believed that God was with her every step of the way. Whatever happened at the gala, whatever the future held, she knew she was walking in His plan. Have you ever been treated unfairly and had to leave it to God? Share your experience below. Comment below. Should Eva still go to the gala? What would you do in her shoes? Eva entered the gala quietly, with a grace that seemed to illuminate the room. She wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, but it held an elegance that radiated from within. A soft pastel color, the fabric flowing effortlessly as she moved, her presence more powerful than any designer label. As she stepped into the grand ballroom, the room fell into a heavy silence, but it wasn't a welcoming one. Eyes followed her. Whispers began to circulate, like a swarm of angry bees. They mocked her clothes, her hair, her presence. What's she doing here? She doesn't belong. The venom in their words was undeniable, and as Eva walked further into the room, the cruel eyes of the women who had tormented her bore into her soul. But she kept her chin high, her heart steady. She didn't flinch. Every step she took, she could feel the judgment, the ridicule. But she smiled, just as she always did. Her faith was her armor. If God be for me, who can be against me? She whispered to herself. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shake. A thunderous roar echoed through the ballroom. The sound grew louder, closer, until it could no longer be ignored. People rushed to the windows in a frenzy, their voices a mix of confusion and awe. Outside, on the lush green fairway of Hillsborough Golf Club, a black private jet descended, its engines roaring as it touched down, the wings of the aircraft cutting through the night air like a blade. The sight was jarring. No one had expected this. Security personnel scrambled to maintain control, their faces pale, unsure of what was happening. Eva stood still, her heart racing. She wasn't sure why, but something in her gut told her that this moment wasn't just a coincidence. Her instincts whispered that everything was about to change. The crowd at the window parted, and through the doorway, there he was, Jonathan Daniels. He stepped out of the jet with the calm of a man who had faced the storms of the world and emerged unshaken. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, the sharp lines of it matching the intensity in his eyes. He moved with an ease that bespoke confidence, a man who knew his worth, knew his power, and knew that no one could challenge it. Eva's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't told him. She hadn't wanted to involve him. But there he was, standing tall and resolute on the tarmac, his gaze locked on the crowd of people who had once belittled his wife. And then, as he strode toward the entrance of the club, his voice rang out, a voice of quiet authority that carried across the room, cutting through the noise of whispers and gasps. "I heard someone's been messing with my wife." The room fell silent. Not just quiet, but dead quiet. No one knew how to react. The tension in the air was palpable. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his presence commanding, his gaze fierce. The people who had mocked Eva, who had belittled her for so long, now faced the wrath of the one person they never expected. Jonathan Daniels was not just a businessman. He was a force. The ripple of fear spread through the room like wildfire. The whispers ceased, the smug faces falling into expressions of uncertainty. Eva watched from the sidelines, her heart a whirlwind of emotions, relief, anger, but most of all, awe. She had known her husband was successful, but this was something entirely different. As Jonathan walked through the room, his steps confident and deliberate, he locked eyes with Chelsea Montgomery, the ringleader of Eva's tormentors. A cold smile curled on his lips. "I don't take kindly to people disrespecting my family," he said, his voice low but filled with a threat that no one could deny. Chelsea's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. No one else dared speak. It was as if the very air had shifted, and all the power in the room had suddenly been sucked into Jonathan's command. Eva stood there, watching the scene unfold. She had spent weeks feeling small, invisible, unsure of how she could ever stand up to the bullies at the club. But now, here was Jonathan, standing up for her in a way she had never imagined. He wasn't just her husband. He was her protector, her advocate, the man who would go to any length to shield her from the cruelty of the world. She could feel the warmth of his love radiating through the room, and in that moment, she knew that no matter what happened next, she was not alone. Did you expect this moment? Drop a wow if this twist caught you. Like and comment if you believe standing by your spouse is powerful. Jonathan's entrance was like a storm, rolling in quiet at first, but with a force that could not be ignored. The room that had once been full of whispers and mocking laughter now stood still, as if frozen in time. He moved through the crowd with a steady, unwavering confidence, his presence filling the space, dominating it. As he approached the club president, the man tried to muster a smile, his eyes flickering nervously from Jonathan to the others in the room. He extended his hand, but Jonathan didn't take it. Instead, he looked the president square in the eyes, his voice low and filled with authority. "Save it," Jonathan said, his words like a slap across the face. "You allowed racism, bullying, and harassment to fester in your halls. You've let this behavior poison this place, and for that, you've all lost my respect." The room felt colder. It was as if the air had thickened with the weight of Jonathan's words. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Jonathan stood tall, looking around at the faces of the board members who had once held all the power in the club. "Effective immediately," he continued, his tone unyielding. "I'm buying this club." "Every single board member?" "Fired." The president's face drained of color, his hand trembling as he withdrew it. The other members of the board shifted uncomfortably, their heads hung low, as if they could feel the noose tightening around their necks. The whispers began to grow, but this time, they weren't mocking. They were full of fear, fear of the man who had just walked into their world and flipped it upside down. Fear of the power he held, and the unshakable resolve in his eyes. And then there was Chelsea. Chelsea Montgomery, the woman who had tormented Eva from the very beginning, stood at the back of the room. Her eyes were wide, her lip trembling as she glanced between Jonathan and Eva. She took a step forward, desperate, her voice shaking. "Jonathan, please." I'm sorry," she cried, her words a mix of guilt and fear. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was just, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know she was your wife. Please, don't do this." But Jonathan didn't flinch. He turned his eyes on Chelsea, the kind of look that made her take a step back, as if the very force of his presence was too much to bear. He didn't need to say anything more, his silence spoke volumes. Eva, standing at the center of it all, could feel the weight of the moment. Everything had led up to this. The cruelty she had endured, the bullying, the mockery, she had endured it all with grace. But now, her husband had made his stand. The decision was hers to make. Jonathan looked at her, his eyes softening. He could see the internal struggle in her eyes, the tension in her heart. He knew what she had been through, knew what she had suffered, but he trusted her to make the right choice. He gave her the power to decide the next step. "It's your choice," Jonathan said, his voice gentle, yet firm. "Forgive or expose." For a moment, the entire room held its breath. The weight of the decision seemed almost unbearable. Eva could feel the anger bubbling inside her, the desire to see these people pay for the way they had treated her. But then, she remembered her faith, the foundation that had held her steady through every trial. "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." She closed her eyes for a moment, whispered a prayer in her heart, and when she opened them again, she looked at Chelsea, at the woman who had tormented her, who had made her feel small and insignificant. Eva could see the fear in Chelsea's eyes now. She was no longer the powerful one. Eva took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady but filled with compassion. "I forgive you, Chelsea," she said. "But this place," she paused, her words carrying a weight that only she could understand. "This place will never be the same." The words echoed through the room, and as they did, a strange calm washed over Eva. It wasn't about forgetting what had been done to her, but about choosing not to let it define her. She had broken the cycle of hatred, choosing instead to rise above it with grace. The board members stood motionless, not sure what to say or do. They had witnessed something they never expected, something that didn't fit into the neat little box they had built for themselves. But it was real. And in that moment, they understood that true power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from within, from the choices we make when no one else is watching. Jonathan, standing by his wife, nodded in silent approval. The club president, defeated and humiliated, turned to leave. The board members followed, their heads hung in shame. Chelsea lingered for a moment longer, but there was nothing left for her to say. She turned and walked out, her dreams of maintaining her status at the club shattered. As the door closed behind her, Eva stood tall, her head held high. The whispers had finally stopped. The bullying had finally ended. And in its place, there was peace. Would you have forgiven Chelsea? Or let her suffer the consequences? Subscribe if you believe faith and power can work hand in hand. The weeks that followed Jonathan's intervention were nothing short of transformational. Hillsborough Country Greens, once a place of division and exclusion, had begun to change. It wasn't an immediate shift, it never is, but the seeds of change had been planted deep in the hearts of the members. Eva was no longer the woman they whispered about. She was now the one people sought out for advice, for encouragement. Women who had once eyed her with suspicion and disdain now greeted her with warm smiles. They saw in her the strength to rise above adversity, the grace to forgive those who had wronged her. They saw in her a model of the kind of woman they aspired to be. New members came to the club, inspired by Eva's story, and they too were drawn into her circle of kindness and faith. She had become a symbol of what it meant to overcome, to stand firm in the face of cruelty and rise above it. And with every new friendship, with every new soul that crossed her path, Eva knew that her pain had not been in vain. In the heart of the club, something new began to take shape. Jonathan, ever the man of vision, had made a decision that would forever change the landscape of the place that had once rejected his wife. By the 9th hole, right where the sun set over the greens, casting a golden glow on the land, he had a chapel built. It was simple, yet beautiful. A place for reflection, a sanctuary for those who needed peace in their souls before they faced the next challenge, whether it be on the green or in their personal lives. The plaque at the entrance read, "For anyone who needs to pray before the next battle." It was a silent testament to the battles fought and won, not just in the game of golf, but in the game of life. Eva found herself volunteering even more, not just as a member of the club, but as a leader. Once a quiet woman seeking acceptance, she had now become a beacon of strength. She started a monthly women's Bible study at the club, gathering women from all walks of life. They met in the evenings, sharing stories, praying together, and finding strength in their faith and in each other. It wasn't about the golf course. It was about the journey of life and the journey of faith. And then there was Chelsea. The story of her departure from Hillsborough wasn't one that spread quickly. It didn't need to. She had left the town in shame, her pride shattered by the consequences of her actions. But Eva, in her own quiet way, had decided that even Chelsea deserved the grace that she had offered to others. One day, Eva sat down at her desk, her fingers dancing across the keys of her laptop. She wrote a letter to Chelsea, not to rub salt in her wounds, but to offer a piece of her heart. In closing a book with the letter, Eva wrote, "I know what it's like to be lost, to feel as though you've made mistakes that can never be undone. But I want you to know that grace is real, and it's never too late to turn things around. May you find peace in the pages of this book and in your heart." The book she had chosen was The Power of Grace, a story that mirrored their own in so many ways. It was a story of redemption, of finding strength in the midst of failure, and ultimately, the power of forgiveness. Eva sent the letter and the book, knowing that her act of kindness might not change Chelsea's heart immediately, but she believed in the power of grace. She knew that it would make a difference, whether Chelsea ever realized it or not. The transformation at Hillsborough Country Greens was not just in the membership. It was in the very spirit of the place. Where there had once been division, there was now unity. Where there had once been whispers, there were now conversations, deep, real conversations. And most importantly, where there had once been bitterness, there was now healing. Eva continued to walk the halls of the club, her head held high, not because she was proud, but because she knew the truth. Grace always wins. It wasn't about what had been done to her. It was about what she chose to do with what she had been given. She had turned her pain into purpose. As the sun set over the 9th hole, shining through the windows of the new chapel, Eva smiled. She had been through the fire, but she had come out stronger, purer, and more powerful than she could have ever imagined. Have you ever turned your pain into purpose? Share your story below. Comment, "Grace wins if you believe in redemption." It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet day that seemed almost sacred. Eva was leading her monthly Bible study at Hillsborough Country Greens, a place she had once feared, now filled with warmth and fellowship. The group was gathered, laughter mingling with the soft clink of teacups, as the women shared stories of hope, redemption, and the power of faith. But then, the door creaked open, and in stepped a woman Eva had never seen before. Her face was lined with years of experience, her eyes tired yet filled with a depth of understanding. She didn't announce herself at first, just stood quietly in the doorway, surveying the room. The conversation slowed, and the women turned toward her. There was something about the woman's presence that commanded attention. She made her way to Eva's side, where she stood, her gaze soft yet purposeful. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said, her voice gentle but steady, "but I believe we need to talk." Eva smiled warmly, but her heart skipped a beat. This was the first time someone had shown up at one of her classes uninvited. The woman handed Eva a small, folded piece of paper. Curious, Eva opened it carefully. Inside was a faded, yellowed photograph. It was of a young girl, no older than 10 or 11, with wide, sad eyes and a frown that seemed too heavy for someone so small. It took Eva a moment to recognize her, but when it clicked, her breath caught in her throat. It was Chelsea, her face unchanged, but the sadness in her eyes was impossible to ignore. The woman sighed deeply before speaking again. "I was Chelsea's nanny when she was little. I watched her grow up in a house that was filled with nothing but pain. Her father was a cruel man, and her mother, well, her mother was distant, never there to protect her." Eva's heart tightened. She couldn't imagine the kind of childhood that would shape a person so deeply. The woman's voice softened as she continued. "Chelsea wasn't born this way. She was a sweet child once. But the scars she carries, they weren't just from the outside. She was bullied at home. She learned that hurt people. And somewhere along the way, she learned to bury her pain with cruelty, to make others feel small, to fill the emptiness inside." The room was silent as Eva looked at the photo again, her fingers tracing the outline of the young girl's face. She felt a knot form in her throat, an overwhelming sense of empathy washing over her. The woman's words echoed in her mind. Hurt people. Eva sat down slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. She had known Chelsea had a sharp edge, but she hadn't known the depth of her wounds. She thought back to the moments of mockery, of cruelty. She had always assumed that Chelsea was simply a product of privilege, someone who felt entitled to her place in the world. But now, the pieces were falling into place, revealing a far more complicated story. Tears welled in Eva's eyes, but they weren't tears of anger or bitterness. They were tears of compassion, tears for the little girl who had never learned how to heal, how to love. She had been sent here, to this very moment, not to win, but to heal. Eva placed the photo down on the table in front of her. The other women in the room watched her closely, sensing the shift in the air. The atmosphere that had once been light-hearted now felt heavy, like a sacred moment unfolding before them. With quiet strength, Eva looked up at the woman who had brought her the photo, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "Maybe I wasn't meant to win against Chelsea. Maybe I was meant to heal her." The woman nodded, as if she had expected Eva to understand. "I think that's exactly it," she replied. "You were meant to be the one who showed her grace. Because sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in defeating someone, but in offering them the chance to change." Eva wiped away a tear, her heart now full of a new kind of resolve. She had fought hard for her place in this world, but the real battle, the one that would bring about lasting change, was one of compassion. She knew what she had to do. Did that twist change how you saw Chelsea? Comment your thoughts. Like this if you believe no one is beyond redemption. The room fell quiet, and Eva sat there, gazing out of the window as the weight of everything she had just learned and experienced settled around her. Her heart felt heavy with understanding, but also lighter, as though the burden of anger had been replaced with a sense of purpose. She had thought for so long that she was in a battle against her tormentors, against Chelsea, against the ones who didn't understand her. But now, with everything that had unfolded, she realized that the real battle wasn't with the people around her. It was with her own heart, learning to forgive, to heal, to be the change she wanted to see. Eva slowly stood up from the table, her voice calm but steady, the room still hanging on her every word. "What would you have done if you were me?" she asked, looking into the eyes of the women who had gathered in her class. She paused for a moment, letting the question sink in. Would you have chosen grace, even when it felt impossible? Would you have been able to look past the hurt and offer a hand to the very person who wronged you? Eva's words lingered in the air, a challenge, a reflection of what true forgiveness and faith could do. She smiled softly, a glint of hope in her eyes. "I think I've learned that God doesn't always call us to fight, but to trust Him with the battles we cannot see. Sometimes, the hardest road leads to the greatest transformation, not just for the people who hurt us, but for ourselves. And when we trust God, when we lean into His strength, He can turn even the most painful situation around for His glory." The quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Eva's story had stirred something deep within them. This wasn't just a story about a woman facing adversity. It was about faith, forgiveness, and the power of grace to change lives. She smiled warmly, eyes full of gratitude for the journey she had shared. Comment your favorite moment from this story, and don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share to your loved ones, because we've got so many more powerful stories of justice, faith, and redemption coming your way. Together, we can keep believing that no situation is beyond God's ability to change.